Thank you. And now on to the next panel. I want to introduce you to the next moderator, old friend of Copenhagen Fintech, Mads Køller Damkjær, Managing Director and part of the Nordic Leadership team at Designet. Mads, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and welcome all of you to the Africa and Middle East session about the design process as fuel for inclusion. So in the next 30 minutes, we will talk about how inclusion potentially is improved by the design process, if fintechs are the front runners, and what incumbent organizations can learn from and interact in this space. So I've been especially excited about this discussion, both because we have 4 really interesting panelists from around the world, and secondly, because this is a very and really important topic. The discussion will focus on inclusion in fintech and with an African, Middle East, and of course some kind of Scandinavian perspective too. Just some practical information. I've followed some of the other talks, and I can see you can ask questions if you have questions in this swap card. So I'll make sure to check it from time to time and see if we can get it in, if time allow, or I will put it in the end. Depends on how things are going and how many questions we have. First of all, in a minute or in a few seconds, we will get acquainted with all the 4 panelists. But first of all, I'll say that we'll begin to talk about or start out by discussing what is inclusion for each of you guys talking. And then we have 2 main questions to go through today. The first is, what is the challenge? And we'll dig into that. And then the second will be, how can we solve it with design? And that will be our 30 minutes. So I'll just introduce your names. We have Oduayo Ivinyi, we have Charlotte Rønje, we have Martha McGinney Fisher, and we have Lisbeth Sacco. And if you will just present yourself and then also answer pretty or quite short, but at least what is inclusion for you in the fintech area. And Oduayo, if you can begin, please.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Oduayo Ivinyi, and I am the co-founder and COO of PiggyVest. PiggyVest is a fintech startup based in Lagos, Nigeria, and we essentially help Nigerians to put aside little amounts of money daily, weekly, or monthly towards a savings target. And once that's achieved, we present them with micro investment opportunities. And inclusion in fintech to me means accessibility and affordability of financial services to everybody. So for a long time, financial services has been exclusionary to young people, to the unbanked, to poorer people. And designing for inclusion and the general idea behind inclusion is being able to carry all of these people along into the financial sector. Like the previous speaker said, being able to manage your own financial affairs gives dignity. It gives some kind of pride in the work that you do, in the money that you've earned. And once you have access and you're able to afford savings, investment, insurance, that's when inclusion has finally occurred.
Thank you. And Charlotte, can you take the next presentation?
Sure thing. My name is Charlotte. I'm co-founder of JamiOne. JamiOne digitalizes traditional savings communities. It's a digital platform built with and for women in already established savings groups. We heard talks today about SACCOs, about SUSUs, different types of communities where you save up together. That is what we digitalize. It's a system built with and for the women in these groups in order to ensure inclusiveness. And that's what inclusiveness is to us. It is designing products and services that are inherently inclusive to anyone, in spite of whichever financial literacy level you have, which was also discussed today, digital literacy level, and so forth. And that's JamiOne and us.
Thank you. And then Martha, can you put a few words on you and what inclusion means to you?
Yeah, so I'm Martha Mgende Fisher, and I'm the founder of European Women Payments Network and African Women in Fintech. We are a community for and of women working in fintech and financial services. We promote and champion for diversity and inclusion, not just gender diversity. We work across Europe and across different African countries. What inclusion means to me, it goes beyond the gender, because when we talk about inclusion, most people think it's about gender inclusion, but it goes beyond gender. It's about racial, getting access to financial services and products to people regardless of their race, religion, background, cultural differences, or ability and disability. So making financial services and products accessible, safe, and affordable to the whole demographic.
Thank you. And Lisbeth.
Yes, thank you, Mads. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Lisbeth Sacco. I'm the founder of Nordic Impact Funds. It's a new fund that's focused on good solutions to the challenges of poverty in Africa. We have recently invested in a fintech savings platform in Uganda. I'm also advisor to Red Cross on innovative finance and engaged in the development of community inclusion currencies in Kenya. It's a blockchain initiative for cash transfer and resilience. I also work with Mastercard as advisor on their impact accelerator, Lighthouse Massive. My background is from the Danish Central Bank, IMF, World Bank, and an international NGO. On financial inclusion, something here. On financial inclusion, to me, it's much more about equal conditions in financial services, equal fees, interest rates, costs, returns, and so on. It's not so much about access to financial services. I think a lot of people have access, they just don't have access to good financial services. And the other thing is that it's the broader portfolio of financial services that is important. It's not only about microloans. For too many years, the discussion has been on microloans. When we talked about financial inclusion, I think it's so much more important to talk about payments, savings, insurance, investments, pension, all this as well.
Thank you. So the situation right now and the challenges in the different countries you're talking about and working with and also just in Africa and Middle East in general, what would you say is the situation right now and the biggest challenges? And maybe we should just start with you, Martha.
Yeah, I think like the previous panelists have also mentioned, when we talk about financial inclusion, people relate that or link that to the poor automatically. Mm-hmm. But digitization has also created a group of people that are excluded from financial services. Let's take an example of Europe. Europe has a very elderly or aging population. And as digitization continues and as products and services continue to be more online, a lot of the elderly people are left out. People with disabilities, people with mental health issue, people with displaced communities because of conflict and war. So while a lot of solutions are being provided and a lot of people are getting access to financial services, digitization has also created a large chunk of group of people that are continuously left out. And as we move more and more towards cashless society, you'll see that all these vulnerable communities will continue to be excluded from this because they won't have access to the same or understanding of the technology that's being used to provide these products and services. So for me, it's while there's a lot of focus on the poor and people who are unbanked or underbanked, is also thinking about communities in developed markets or developed countries, the elderly, the misplaced, and people with different disabilities. So I think that also has to be given priority and a focus.
Okay. Thank you. And is that part of kind of community and the challenges, is that something you see as well, Udwayo, in your part? Oh, I think you're on mute.
So I think that we approach it slightly differently from the fintech sector here in Nigeria. And just like Martha said about the communities that are excluded, we see those same trends excluding young people in financial services. So ideally, when people speak of the excluded, they think of the unbanked and the economically inactive. But what we've seen is that existing financial infrastructure also doesn't cater to the needs of 60% of the population, and that's young people. There's young people who want to open bank accounts, there's young people who want to save, there's young people who want to invest. But what you see is that everything is so paper-based, everything is so prohibitive, and the ticket sizes to buy in are so large that almost automatically, even a 21-year-old, a 22-year-old cannot take full advantage of the financial services ecosystem. So there is so many different ways to approach the inclusivity that involves including the unbanked, the economically inactive, those communities, and then millennials who already even use smartphones but still cannot take advantage of these financial services.
Okay, thank you. And Charlotte, as we had said, digitalization and fintech has created a new group of financial excluded people. Is that, which is both? Do you have an echo as well?
There's a little bit of a disconnect, but can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So we hear that it's the poor and the young and unbanked. Where do you see the challenges, the biggest issues and the biggest challenges in this area?
Well, I think it's already being touched upon by the others, right? And also, if you are looking into the unbanked, then it becoming digital economic finance, then it means also that we're not just financially excluded. If you're excluded from digital platforms, for instance, if you're a mother going at home with 6 children, you may not have the digital skills to access the new services that are being provided to you. And if we want to go a little bit into solution mode here, I feel that this is really a good place to look into some opportunities. In Ethiopia, where we are mostly active, we've managed to secure a partnership with the government of technology, or the Ministry of Technology and the Ministry of Women, because they are dedicated to bridging the digital divide of these women. And also with the public sector. And I think, the civil society. So NGOs, donors working already with these people can lift some of the educational needs that are here, and also help private companies to adapt to the needs in these groups. So that might mean more training, more learning, building teaching into your technology in order to also make something that can actually be used, also like what was said in the previous session to this one.
Thank you. Lisbeth, I'll jump to you and ask, when you're looking at funding and investing, are you looking at specific inclusion challenges also, or how do you look at this? And also, is it one thing is inclusion in the market, but also how do you look at the teams that you invest in and all the areas you fund in? And what happens when fintech teams are not diverse? Is that something you are looking into as well?
Yes, thank you, Mads. First of all, we look very much into the issue of inclusion, both in terms of the teams that we are investing into, but certainly also in terms of the solution that they're providing. I think the big challenge, at least when we talk about poor people, is that poor people tend to pay the highest interest rates on loans. They pay the highest transaction fees on payments, and they get the lowest returns on their savings. And this is sort of broadly across today's financial inclusion. And I think it boils down to 2 very important issues. The first one is trust, or the lack of trust in poor people. So even though they typically have an amazingly low default rate on loans. They cannot themselves prove their personal track record. I know you, Charlotte, you have an amazing solution for that. But in general, it means that the credit risk on poor people is extremely high. The other thing is the transaction costs. Poor people transact very small amounts. The cost of dealing with these many small account holders and small payments and small loans makes it costly. The good thing about that is that fintechs should be able to solve that problem, and that's very much what we are looking for when we invest. The bad thing is that fintechs can also worsen the situation, and we are seeing that in some markets. Because on the African continent, you see that the market is actually flooded with new fintech solutions. And there are a lot of those that are not really good solutions, but they're giving poor people access, and maybe that's good, but they're giving access to loans in the name of financial inclusion. I'd say only 3% per week, that is. Mm-hmm. So easy access to a lot of expensive loans, is that really what is needed? And it puts a lot of people into debt traps that they cannot get out of. So I think that's the big challenge.
Yeah. So an open question for all of you: how can we design the solutions that can help us out of? I mean, this is a broad palette of challenges. And so first of all, do you see this as something? Is it a system we have to fix, or is it more based on individual, both countries, but also fintechs and companies? So can we fix a system that can help, or do we need to tweak every single part of the big equation?
I can start. I think there's hope, because let's take the gender aspect of gender diversity. So we're seeing more and more solutions that are designed by women for women, based on their own needs, pains, and experiences and expectations. So these are products and services that are going to solve that unmet needs when it comes to female consumers. And it's the same thing that can be said for all these other different products and services. And I think it's very important for companies to ensure that they have, because there's no single company, that financial institution that offers solutions to a demographic, to a homogeneous demographic, right? There's very vast and different people in diverse. So companies have to ensure they have the representation of the consumers they're designing products for, not just on the product design team, but on boards, the P&L holders, the decision makers, the marketing team, for example. Mm-hmm. So you have to ensure diversity and representation of these people that you're designing your products and services for, in order for you to understand, to create, to market, and sustain these products. Otherwise, you will find more and more dissatisfied consumers and solutions that are created inside the boardroom, which serve no purpose whatsoever and are not really including people. So there is a lot of things that can be done to solve this.
Yeah. Do you agree?
Yes, definitely.
Good. So is that what you see also in Nigeria, Oduano? Or I mean, can we learn from other countries or geographies in this?
Well, I think that, like Martha's right, representation does matter, and people tend to do things for people who look like them. So when you have all of these like diverse opinions at every level of decision making, what you come out with is typically a well-rounded product that like serves the purpose of more people than just one demographic. And I suppose a supporting aspect to that would be the feedback system for the product. right? Lots of companies build in isolation. Lots of companies build without like user feedback at every stage of the iteration process for the launching of a particular product. So what you're supposed to do typically is when you build with the input of the people whom you're building for, not just the diverse people on your team, but a focus group, right? A small user group, a test group of the people who you're building for, so that lots of these conveniences are built and baked into the product during the design process, as opposed to post-launch when people start to create complaints. And that's an example of how we've managed to build our product here in Nigeria, is by just like accumulating customer feedback, sorting through that data, and inculcating it into the design and building process before the product is then pushed to the market.
Yeah, okay, interesting. And I was also thinking of something you said earlier, Lisbeth, that fintech can be the solution, but it can also be the problem, and we see that. And also in our pre-talk, we actually talked about how some of the fintech solutions in Africa will also lend out to poor young people. Friday afternoon when it's time for drinks and so on, and it can screw up the private finance. So how can we be sure that that fintech is the solution, and all the and not just and not solving the problems? And in that role, for all of you, actually, what is the role of ecosystems? Do they play something? And maybe that's for you, Martha. And also, what is the role of investors and funds in this? Can we in that way support how we solve the inclusion issues with fintechs? Maybe Charlotte, do you have an opinion on this?
Then I would definitely point to the ecosystem and back to the government. I think it will never be an either or, will always be an and. You will have the government, as you've seen in Europe now, putting legislation down on some types of loans. We cater mostly to here we term them poor segment, and I'd like to quote one of my favorite people, an Ethiopian in our team, who said, "You cannot cheat a poor person." And that's because it's essential to them to have the money. And so if you I hope that Jamie will be able to at least outcompete lesser good alternatives, and also provide insights into what is good loans to make that more clear. And then from there is a large momentum in the community to spread the words of good and bad lending. And I think that should not be overlooked as part of the ecosystem, the communities.
Okay. And Lisbeth, the role of investors and funds, I mean, how do you ensure that that fintech is solving the right problems?
Well, we cannot ensure that the investors do that across the board, but for the fund that I'm working on, of course we can ensure it, because we have it very much embedded in our DNA that we are an impact fund. So of course we would only want to help scaling up the solutions that actually address inclusion. So that's our mission. But other funds would maybe go for where they think they can make the most money. So so that's always a dilemma. I don't think you can only rely on the investors. I think it has to be partly government regulation, and then of course you can embed it into the design again of the solutions, where you build this trust among people into the design. So for a good design, both it's a trusted solution in itself, and to become that, I think it needs to have some good ethics. And the other thing is, how can the solution also build trust among the people, the users?
I think we have a question, maybe.
We have a question from someone at the audience. We have a question here from someone at the audience. What are some of the common mistakes that prevents design from being inclusive? Do you think there is a limit to how inclusive a product can be? I don't think it's not targeted anyone specific, so just go ahead.
Yeah.
I think if I can start, I think it starts really with in the design problem. It starts really with the problem. You have to ask the right questions. You have to embed inclusion all the way in the problem you want to solve. Too often, I think it starts with a cool technology that you want to use for some kind of purpose.
Good.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And if I can go, I think it's the intention. Companies have to be intentional in creating and designing products that are inclusive. Management, boards, the founders, the decision makers have to be intentional at all times. So if you have intention, I think that's the first thing. And what Lisbeth has said about ethics as well. But it starts with intention. If you have the intention of creating inclusive products, then you will do all that is needed to be able to do that. And there's no limit when it comes to inclusion, because at the end of the day, there's no company that serves a single demographic. So it doesn't make any sense why we shouldn't be inclusive as a company. So it's the intention.
Yeah. But Wayo, can you, because this is actually, we have 3 minutes left, and it's also really catering to my last question, which is how can inclusion improve the design process? So I think we are also already answering it, and maybe do we have one or some main things to how design can improve it?
Right. So I think that one of the things that design can help to eliminate when you are very intentional about inclusion is assumptions. When you've included and represented all parties and all minorities, and just like the necessary reviews in your design process, you stop assuming that Black people will be okay with this. You stop assuming that women will be okay with this. You stop assuming that this minority community or that minority community will be okay with this. And instead, you're working with verified answers from people who are a part of that community. And that in turn reduces pushback. And honestly, I don't think that there's any limit to how inclusive a product can be. When you're launching a product, you want it to go to the mass market. You want it to go to the users. If the users are diverse, then the product should be flexible enough to include every single person whom you're targeting. And you should do that with all intent, with a lot of energy behind it, satisfying the uses of everybody who you're targeting. And so, you eliminate assumptions almost completely, and that's really helpful during the design process.
Good. And Charlotte?
It's almost leading me to a little bit one of my favorite points, which is about, I think, the failure of blockchain, which is that it's designed, to me at least, it seems to be designed for men in their late 20s in Silicon Valley, but those are not the people that they're designing this technology for. So going back to what Jumu World representative was saying, that if you're going to be designing for the whole world, then you need to visit the whole world. You need to visit countries. You need to sit down with all of the different segments that you might be catering to, which is what we did in our initial first 2 months of existence and have done ever since, and have to keep doing. Otherwise, it will not be inclusive.
Okay, thank you. So time really flies today. I think I will conclude with what you just said in the end. So good design for inclusion is, as I got it from you, that you start with the problem. It has to be with intentions and assumptions, and then design cannot be too inclusive or inclusive enough. And in the end, visit countries and learn. So it's about prototyping, learn, and test it. Right? Is that what we can conclude in these 30 30 minutes.
Very good.
Very
Good.
good.
Thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.